What degree of ignition correction do you deem acceptable on pump files?
Yeah, they didn't list what car they were talking about. I mean,
It can vary,
it can
but
vary a lot depending on the car, and
but
honestly,
generally, you
if
don't. You I mean you don't let the ECU do like 15 degrees of
no, no.
correction.
So, I mean, I'd say very general answer. Anything, we like to see less than five on
Hmm.
on a
Yeah,
given cylinder, and if usually we'd like to see less than that on across the board, uh, meaning they're all not like all of your cylinders aren't sitting at 5 degrees pull. Usually, you'll see one or two here or there pop up.
hmm,
Um, so yeah, I mean, ideally, obviously, we try and shoot for very low to none.
yeah.
It's just the fuel octanes and setups vary, a bit across the
Yeah,
countries.
timing correction for the most part is a safety net, right? Or like a parachute. You don't want to use it as part of your tuning protocol.
No.
So imagine like you have two airplanes, and one of them you're in the airplane the whole time, and you get to your destination on land, and the other airplane you're coasting to your destination on a parachute half the way. I don't know which flight you'd rather be on, but like our goal is to not use the parachute for your engine tuning. But there are lots of tuners because they can't modify or engineer the base tuning, the base calibration. They can't re-engineer the ECU. They can't account for the upgrades or the airflow changes
Yeah.
or the pressure changes. Then they just let the closed loop wideband fuel system and the ignition knock correction kind of make up for the inefficiency. But honestly, that's like getting to your destination on a parachute.
Yeah.
And
And
who wants to do that?
I mean, to that point too, that's literally every like tuning box out there
Yeah,
is it's forcing the ECU to further deviate from what it, is calibrated for,
yeah.
and you're leaning on the knock channel and and your closed loop fueling to catch up with it.
It's the sign of bad tuning, and it's a really bad habit. But there are tuners that have not corrected their way to greatness, and that's not the way to do it.
So
So
yeah, no, we shoot for, as little correction as is reasonable on a given platform. Some are more tendent than others to pull timing here and there. That's usually like a sensitivity thing, the way
mhm.
that the OE calibration is done. Uh, so yeah,
Yeah, and there's another issue of there is no such thing as not knock sensors don't just hear or sense detonation.
yeah,
They hear everything. And so the job of the tuner and calibrator is as boost pressure changes, as turbochargers change, as volumetric efficiency changes, the the telltale signs of detonation, which the knock sensor is just a microphone. And so it's receiving all the sounds of the engine, every single thing. The rings scraping on the piston walls, the combustion events, the valves, and springs
the
compressing,
injectors, which are
the
incredibly annoying,
injectors that are
the
quick. Yeah,
pumps, yeah, there's
every
other
sound,
ancillaries.
it is picking up. So the job of what the factory does is they filter what the knock sensor is actually seeing or sensing,
Yep.
and that's what the factory is able to determine when the microphone hears these certain types of sounds and frequencies at these certain times. That's detonation.
Yeah, and they're very specifically time sliced,
Yeah.
right? Around the ignition event.
But as we began changing things as tuners, as we turn the boost up, as we change components on the engine,
Rev the motor higher.
right?
You're outside of whatever the factory deemed a
Those
reasonable range.
those factory calibrations for the knock sensing system begin to change, and so you know we spend quite a bit of time, reshaping those parameters of what the knock sensor can and is hearing and is determining as knock. Now, if you don't do that, then the knock sensor will start accounting for sounds that aren't detonation as detonation. And then what happens is a perfectly normal running engine starts pulling timing.
Yeah.
Or there'll be a new sound character to detonation that the knock sensor isn't programmed for, and so it won't hear detonation. I remember at SEMA years ago, um, one of the standalone engine management companies had a knock sensing module, which this was like 12, 13 years ago. Knock sensing for standalones was a big deal. All the factory ECs had it, but in the aftermarket, none of the standalones had it. So they released this module, and you could walk up to the knock sensor with like a little metal bar and you could like tap on the knock sensor and you could see the lights light up. And it's just like, okay, so right now this unit is saying retard timing, but I'm just hitting it with a piece of metal. That's not detonation. So how the hell are we going to make this thing know what detonation sounds like? And there's some knobs you could kind of turn, and it's like this is going to be a disaster.
But yeah,
you know?
yeah, and they weren't obviously timed to
It's
any ignition
yeah,
events. They weren't.
and that's the key part is the ECU needs to listen for detonation at a range of crankshaft position where detonation could actually occur. Outside, for that cylinder outside of that range, it doesn't have to, it doesn't care what any of the sounds are. But there is a range of degrees of timing, crankshaft rotation, that the ECU knows this is the time when detonation can happen. And so, you start filtering it down like that. It's very complex. All that to say, there's no magical thing called a knock sensor that just spiritually senses knocks.
Yeah.
That's not a thing. So it's a very precisely massaged and manipulated signal that the knock sensor, the ECU interprets from the knock sensor.
Right. And there are some other controls some OEMs use. There's the
Mm-hmm.
pre-ignition detection with ionization from actual
Yeah.
spark plug feedback,
Mhm.
which is pretty cool.
That's a really cool tech.
But yeah, to Joe's point, knock sensors are still 99% of what is getting leaned on. And I mean, if you're not calibrating that correctly, you can take a 91 octane file that's showing like, 5, 6, 7, 8 degrees of knock, put 100 octane fuel, 104 octane fuel, and you get 5, 6, 7, 8 degrees of knock still, and you go, what's going on here? That's basically noise now that you haven't you haven't calibrated properly for. So what a lot of what happens a lot of the time is people will just push up into the knock sensor corrections and just force ECU to pull a bunch of timing because they haven't moved those or recalibrated the actual knock sensing tables.